This session, the two sessions today and tomorrow, are an outgrowth of a request from last year. Was my third time speaking, and we have quite a nice community that takes place each year at Alpha Artist Network, and there's a debrief at the end, and during that debrief, several people said, well, David, you're talking about art and you're talking about music, and we'd really like we'd like to listen to some music with you. So this would be much easier to do if we were sitting in the same room together, but I do have some clips and things, some listening to do together, but these are, visual artists and people who said, we'd really like to learn how to listen to music better. So, but the context for this has to do with everything we've talked about thus far, particularly these two sessions on poetry that we've just gone through, because it has to do with listening better. It has to do with prayer, and creating the space and the temperament, the attitude towards God in the midst of an artistic expression. And our response to it is to bring every thought captive to Christ, right? So that art can actually be your partner in that process, right? So Charles talked yesterday about art in troubled times. And, I was thinking as he was speaking that in troubled times, people look for meaning. They want to know why the suffering is there. As particularly Christians, we're looking for God's purpose in whatever suffering there is. And art actually provides the opportunity for us to reflect on that. Perfect example was the Psalm that Tim and Natalie just unpacked for us, but not necessarily to define the meaning so clearly, but rather that people can find meaning there in their own context as a result of reflection upon the art that they're experiencing. Charles also mentioned Roger Scruton, had a quote from Roger Scruton yesterday, and Scruton often talks about how art helps us find our place in the world. And not just in our own place and time, but historically, to orient ourselves in the meaning of our lives within a broader context. Art is very, very helpful in this. As Christians, we tend to think of art in a very utilitarian kind of way. This speaks to what Hall was talking about yesterday in the idea of consuming poetry, and reading a poem and so that I can take what I want and what's useful to me. And we listen to a lot of different things that way, but, what did you get out of the sermon? What did you, what do you get out of worship? What's useful to me? And the sort of, so we're going to look at perhaps a different way of approaching that. So, so the first question I have for you to think about is how do we listen in our culture? How do you listen? When you hear music is ubiquitous. It's everywhere we go. It's usually being used to sell us something, either itself or some product. But, from shopping malls to elevators to everything, it's everywhere we go. But do we listen? Do we actually listen? And of course, it's a rhetorical question, but there, sort of implicit in the question is the idea that we can listen better than we normally do and treat music, or all of art, but specifically music in this session, that we can listen better and not simply use it as background, not simply use it as a soundtrack for our lives. Not only listen to words, but rather listen to the music itself. Now, a lot of music doesn't actually lend itself to deep listening because there's not a lot of there, which is why we'll focus today on classical music we're doing that because that's what I do, and this is the session that I'm leading. But there's also a lot to listen to, and it can help us to listen to everything better. So, Mark, let's talk a little bit, because I mean, you've been writing novels, and all these, I forget how many, at least 10 published novels you have, and it's out there. And I highly recommend Mark's novels. They're really terrific things to read. But you came to listening to music relatively recently, and you've had kind of a journey that you've taken. So why do you think it's difficult for people coming to listening deeper and in a new way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I did always have a desire to like be a classical music listener. Like, I thought that really fit with who I was, and I was guilty of doing what you were talking about earlier, listening to it in the background. And providentially, it turns out that my next door neighbor is a symphony conductor. And when I realized this, I thought, well, God has given me this opportunity to draw near. And you have to understand, when you watch a movie with David, I'm like, oh, the soundtrack is beautiful. And David is grumbling, this isn't background music. Why are they playing this in the background? This should be the focus. And quickly, I start to realize, although we share a love, he's listening in a completely different way to how I'm listening. And what it made me think of was, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with John Berger's book, Ways of Seeing, and the idea that we need to learn how to see things, really look and see them. And I started thinking about listening in the same way, that although music filled my life, and I would have said I loved music, I actually had a hard time listening to it. The first symphony concert I went to, the struggle was not, do I understand the rich layers of meaning in the music? The struggle was, how can I continue to sit through the whole thing? Because I'm just not used to sitting there and paying attention for that long. And the light bulb went off, and I realized this is the same kind of problem people have when they come to me as a pastor and say, I struggle to pray. I can't pray for any length of time. And I think there's a capacity that we have to build first in order to be able to engage in that activity. And the problem, at least for me, wasn't, that I hated music. I think it's that the music that I was surrounded by isn't meant to be listened to in that way. Like you said, I mean, the music is created to be consumed in the background. And so trying to engage with it the way that it's made to be engaged with, it had formed my listening habits in a way that made it hard for me to hear this other kind of music. And so I think that really, in my experience, is the heart of the problem, is not that we don't want to listen, but we've actually been formed differently. And so in order to listen, there's a kind of unforming that has to happen before we can gain the attentiveness necessary.
So that goes to the orientation, disorientation, reorientation,
right?
That we just talked about.
Right. Sitting through the concert was disorientation, and eventually, by staying there, I was reoriented.
Yeah. Right. Well, and we know that it works that way with prayer also. I found this to be helpful in so many ways. I mean, I'm a professional musician, so I learned to listen this way a long time ago. But when I'm in a museum, it's the same now, that same kind of process when I'm looking at art, that staying with it and allowing myself to contemplate in the midst of it. Like, this is This is the reason why you would want to cultivate the ability to sit and patiently listen to a concert of music in the first place. I mean, a lot of people can't even imagine, why would I want to go to a concert hall and sit for 2 hours and listen to music, music that's unfamiliar to me. And it's largely because people don't know how to listen, but so this will be a little bit of a tutorial in how to approach that topic at all. But again, the idea is that getting to the place where we in general can listen better. Like if you go to my website, just deltadavidgier.com, and I'm not trying to sell myself here, don't get me wrong, but I replaced, because everything's been canceled, all of the activity, all the travel, everything that I do, I replaced it with a COVID message on my website. And it's basically, the message is, we're professional musicians, we're professional listeners. We have a lot to teach the world right now about listening. And it's not just about listening to music, it's about listening to each other. Because if we can pay attention, if you think about what a classical musician does, like we come to every single rehearsal, every single performance, and we practice very hard, but then in the moment when we're making the music together, we're listening intently, first of all, to the composer and what the composer is intending, but then to each other. It's an intense exercise in attention giving. And so we actually have something to offer the rest of the world right now. I mean, imagine if every politician had played in an orchestra, how much better they would be able to listen to one another when they come to try to negotiate their way out of problems. So, we have these basic elements of music: melody, harmony, rhythm. Form is one that I'm going to bring in today briefly. In this, there's all these different aspects, and becoming familiar with these elements and listening to them, sort of tearing them apart a little bit, will actually serve as a conduit for listening. So Mark, as you were learning to listen to music differently, how did it change your experience?
So, yeah, what we just did earlier with Psalm 77, I had a similar experience through David's guidance with a piece of music by Olivier Messiaen, which a group of us in our living room decided over the course of Advent several years ago to just listen through and talk through. And David suggested this, and I was on board, but I didn't fully appreciate what this would involve. And so we gathered in the living room, kind of in a small circle, and David started playing this music. And eventually I realized his intention was to play it all and have us talk through all of it. And you start thinking, like, where am I supposed to be looking right now? It's awkward to look at other people and make eye contact while you're listening together. And so there was that first kind of almost the panicky feeling you get when you've just been thrown in the water and you're not sure what's going to happen, and maybe you're going to drown. And in this case, we discovered we weren't going to drown. We had gills. We had the ability to hear. And so David would ask questions. What do you think of this music? And didn't correct our interpretation, but he gave us more and more information to help us sort of form an understanding of the piece of music and the influences that went into it, and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, I look back now, and this music, when I first heard it, sounded oppressive and weighty to me, heavy. And now I look back with knowledge, and it sounds delightful and full of love and life. The difference was gaining an appreciation of knowledge and technique and that sort of thing. But it had to come at the right moment, after I was already submerged. And I think that's maybe the challenge, is that too often, in the arts, we see this, whether it's art appreciation, music appreciation, whatever, all of our attempts to teach others how to appreciate and understand what we do it becomes abstraction if you're not already immersed and in need of those skills. And so I think what was most beneficial to me was reversing the order and being thrown in the deep end, and then needing the knowledge of technique, of melody, harmony, and those kind of things to make sense of the world I was already living in.
And you mentioned yesterday the need to need it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in prayer, right? So you come to a place where you realize, I need some tools.
Right.
Right.
If you, that's the danger of saying, Lord, teach me to pray, or Lord, give me wisdom. Because oftentimes the way we're taught to pray is by going through suffering. And we're taught wisdom through suffering. And because we find we suddenly need to commune with God at length.
Right, right. So let's do a little exercise here. And for the musicians on the call, my apologies. This is going to be like super, super basic for you. And it may be for the rest of you as well. But let's just give our attention to a rather familiar piece of music for a moment. I'll say that you should adjust the volume on your listening, because the examples I'm going to play from Beethoven and then from Shostakovich, they run a really large gamut of being very soft and very loud. The first one is loud, so I don't want you to blow your ears out, particularly if you have earbuds in right now. So here we go. I'm going through all my process here and share screen. So obviously Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. You may like it, you may not like it, you may be familiar, it may be unfamiliar, but how would you even approach listening to it? And let's start with the first four notes. So as a conductor, I can tell you that this symphony is about 35 minutes long, but the entirety of the symphony is contained in those first four notes. All of it, from 35 minutes of music. I can't really, give you all the details in that, but take my word for it. The melody, the rhythm, and the harmony are all contained in those first four notes. So that's it's filled with meaning. So dum bum bum bum. The next, he's going to do it again now, but on a different pitch level. Same four notes on a different pitch level. So we have ba 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 da 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 dum, but the actual key of the symphony, the actual home base, is the next pitch down. Bum, that's C. So if you think of a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He starts on the 5th degree, 5, and then he goes to 3, 4, 2, and then we're finally going to get a sense of 1. Okay, we're here. That's where we've come to. So he's going to take us on a journey through those notes. So again, just listen to this introduction again, and listen to how those four notes, that ba 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 ba, how he uses that over and over again to build upon each other and to start to take us on a journey. So that for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is what we call the first theme. It's a theme is a musical idea. It's like a character in the novel. And the first section of Beethoven's First Symphony is called an exposition. So the exposition in a symphony is the same as an exposition in a novel or a short story. It's the introduction of the characters. You can think of each melodic idea as a character. And what a symphonist will do is he or she will take a musical idea, and then there'll be a second musical idea, sometimes a third and fourth, but in this case, two different musical ideas. And he will then present the first one and then the second idea. This is introduced by a big horn, statement of that first theme, but then you'll hear a contrasting theme that comes in next. Here it is. So that musical idea we call the second theme. And it's in contrast. The first theme, back when I was a student, we used to call them masculine and feminine themes. That doesn't fly anymore. So but there's a heroic theme, a very aggressive theme. And then this second one is much more expressive of a gentler idea, a more lyric idea. Let's just listen to the beginning of that second theme again. That's the intro, and here. Again, and again. And then he'll start to spin it out. So this is the way a composer who's very serious about the music that they're composing will take a musical idea and begin to develop it, and begin to spin it out, and take you further on the journey. So you have this exposition where you present the themes, and at the end of the exposition will come another section called the development. And this in a short story would be like a rising action, where you'll have the characters who have been presented in the exposition in conflict with one another. Some sort of crisis, usually, leading to a climax. And then in a story, you would have a resolution, like the beginning, middle, and end. It's the same thing in a symphony. We call it the recapitulation, where we once again present the musical ideas more or less in their original context, but the composer will bring us this way, bring us to this point, and we find a sense of resolution in the end of it. So that we feel like we've come through this journey with the composer if we're listening carefully. And you don't have to know a lot of detail about it in order to enter deeper into the journey. You just have to pay attention. So let's listen a bit to this exposition again of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So now that's the complete first theme section of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the first movement. So he's already taken us on a journey. Harmonically, he's also taken us on a journey. And again, it's not necessary for you to know this, but it helps to be aware that we've gone to another place now in order to introduce a new character. It's like shifting from one situation or even one more geographical location into another in order to present a new idea in a new context. So now we have this second theme, which comes in. So that's the second theme. And now we come to actually a closing idea. It's an amalgamation. It's a compilation of the material that's come to this point, but it's a wrapping up, so that we come a wrapping up of the exposition, just the exposition. But it gives us a sense of having completed it. So here's that closing theme, closing idea for this exposition. That's the exposition. And now what a composer will often do is repeat the exposition, which is exactly what he's going to do right now. Oh, I forgot. I didn't do the repeat on the recording. My fault. So now we're entering the development section. So let me take that back just a little bit. So with that horn theme, the horns, the same way he introduced the second theme, the lyrical theme, he's going to take us off on this rising action, the development of this first movement. Now the horn theme. Now the development. Wait, where are we going? And again, where? Now we're at the recapitulation. So we've just come through this trajectory of taking the musical ideas that he originally presented and putting them in different contexts. Harmonically, we've gone to a very wide range of areas. It's like traveling through, I think of the Lord of the Rings in the second book of the Lord of the Rings, when they're traveling through all this country and trying to get to, long before they get to the battle at Isengard and all of this, but they're traveling. So that's kind of what Beethoven has done, is he's taken us through like different terrain to bring us back to this climax point, which is the restatement of those first four notes. Bum, 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 bum. And then he's going to continue with these musical ideas represented in a little bit different context, but not so much. It will be very familiar. So we won't listen to the rest of this movement. That oboe theme is very interesting because it's a little bit of compositional sleight of hand, that he uses this little oboe cadenza, the little oboe solo, to redirect us harmonically. And again, you're not necessarily going to be aware of the harmony. It's kind of like the setting of the story, that has changed so much, but it has changed. You can be aware of that, and then it will set us on the trajectory to the end of the movement. We don't have time to do all of that now. Can I just get a sense, is this working for you listening wise? Are you able to, yeah? Yeah, okay, good. I'm sorry about the sound quality. I have 3 other things I'd like to play for you. And these are 3 examples of one musical idea in the 3rd movement of Shostakovich's 5th Symphony. So these are all 1 minute long, these clips, and I'll try to get them so that I can actually share them in a way that you can hear them. I just didn't want to have to be searching around for all these clips before. So I'll give you just a little bit of context. So imagine you've gone to a concert hall and you're going to hear Shostakovich's 5th Symphony. Something that you might want to do is attend a pre-concert lecture about it. Usually most orchestras will give a lecture of 30 minutes or so, an hour ahead of time, which is included with your ticket. Or at least get, a few minutes early and take a look at the program notes that are in your program. And in this case, you would find out that Shostakovich lived and died underneath the Soviet regime. And the thing, we didn't know this for decades, but actually just last week I was on a Zoom call with a Shostakovich scholar named Solomon Volkov. And Volkov wrote a book back in the 70s called Testimony. So Volkov was actually Shostakovich's assistant. And he wrote this book and a couple of other books since about his time with Shostakovich. And it answers a pregnant question when anyone hears music of Shostakovich is, what does it mean? And Shostakovich never wrote about it. In fact, he couldn't write about it underneath the Soviet regime. This is a man who had multiple death threats from Stalin himself because of what Stalin intuited as subversive material. And in fact, Volkov makes it clear that Shostakovich was giving voice to the suffering of an entire people, the Russian people, underneath Stalin. And there are not so veiled references once you begin to understand. But this 5th Symphony he actually subtitled it a Soviet artist's reply to just criticism, which has a bitter irony to it because it came as a result of Stalin's first threat to Shostakovich's life. After hearing a couple of pieces of Shostakovich. And yet, Shostakovich was able to write a gorgeous, powerful piece of music that still contained within it a message, an implicit message to the people who were listening about solidarity in the midst of suffering. And this particular theme, I'm going to call it the oboe theme. It is very poignant, but he casts it in 3 very different ways within this same movement. So we're not going to hear the whole movement. It's only 15 minutes long. So we'll hear the 3 times that this one theme appears. You'll hear a little bit of an introduction in the violins, and then you'll hear the oboe come in. And this is the theme that I'll be talking about. So So think of words that you would use to describe that music, that oboe theme. I wish if we were in the room together, I would just ask you to toss out adjectives. But you know, it's a poignant theme. No, it has a heartachy kind of composition to it. It takes us to a very deep place. In specifically knowing a little bit about Shostakovich and his life. You could think of that as orientation. The second clip I'm going to play for you is definitely a disorientation. This is the climax of this slow movement of Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, the third movement. And the introduction is a very passionate expression of the theme that just precedes it, and then you'll hear a slight break, and then you'll hear this same theme come in the cellos, kind of screaming. So here's the second time that this appears. So did you hear that cello theme was the same thing that the oboe played? It's the same melodic idea that the oboe played way up high and this very ethereal kind of thing. And all of a sudden you have the cello is just like screaming this very theme out. Like you come away like, what does that mean? Well, here's the last, the very tail end of that movement where he uses this theme to reorient us. Powerful, no? And you ask yourself the question, what does that mean? But as a Christian, listening to this music, performing this music, the profundity of it takes me to a place where I can enter into an empathy with the suffering of others. I can bring that before the Lord and allow God to change me, to soften my heart, to draw me closer to others, Christian or not. And we could go on and on about what Shostakovich meant, but I'll leave you with that we played this at the Masterworks Festival several years ago, and we had these conversations among Christians. And the question of the meaning. What we decided, though, was that when a composer makes themselves so vulnerable, as Shostakovich just did, that the Holy Spirit inhabits a place of vulnerability, that we can meet God in that place if we open ourselves up to this. And this is the power that art can provide.